A doctor refuses to help a homeless child, but deeply regrets it after watching TV. Have you ever wondered how a single decision can change the course of your entire life? What if that choice could make you question everything you once believed in? Get ready for a powerful story of redemption, regret, and the unexpected lessons that life throws at us. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories that touch your heart and inspire your soul. Dr. Michael Harrington's sleek black Audi R8 purred into his reserved parking spot. The car door swung open, and out stepped the man himself, 52 years old, salt and pepper hair artfully styled, his tailored Armani suit a testament to his exquisite taste and bottomless bank account. As he walked towards the hospital entrance, the click of his Italian leather shoes against the pavement seemed to echo the steady rhythm of his heart, confident, unwavering, and utterly detached from the world around him. Nurses, orderlies, and even fellow doctors parted before him like the Red Sea, their eyes a mixture of awe, envy, and just a hint of fear. For Dr. Michael Harrington was not just any surgeon. He was the surgeon, the man whose steady hands had saved countless lives, whose innovative techniques had revolutionized cardiac surgery, and whose name was whispered in reverent tones in medical schools across the country. He was a living legend, a medical marvel, and he knew it. As he entered the pristine lobby, the receptionist's voice chirped out a greeting. "Good morning, Dr. Harrington. You have a call from the mayor's office about his upcoming procedure." Michael barely acknowledged her with a curt nod as he strode past, his mind already racing through the day's schedule. A groundbreaking surgery at 9, a lecture for eager residents at 11, lunch with the hospital board at 1, and then... His thoughts trailed off as he remembered the charity gala that evening. Another opportunity to schmooze with New York's elite, to further cement his status as the city's premier surgeon. The elevator whisked him up to his private office on the top floor, a space that reflected the man himself, sleek, modern, and utterly devoid of personal touches. No family photos graced his desk, no sentimental knickknacks cluttered the shelves. Instead, the walls were adorned with his numerous awards, certificates, and newspaper clippings chronicling his meteoric rise to the top of his field. As he settled into his ergonomic chair, Michael's eyes fell upon the only item in the room that seemed out of place, a small, tarnished silver frame tucked away in the corner of his desk. Within it, a faded photograph of a young woman with wild, curly hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief and determination. Sarah, his younger sister, the one person who had always seen through his carefully constructed facade. For a moment, a flicker of something passed across Michael's face. Regret, longing, but as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by the cool, professional mask he had perfected over the years. He hadn't spoken to Sarah in over a decade, not since that final explosive argument where she had accused him of losing his humanity in his relentless pursuit of success. "You used to care about people, Michael," her words echoed in his memory. "What happened to that idealistic kid who wanted to change the world?" He shook his head, banishing the unwelcome thoughts. That idealistic kid was long gone, replaced by a man who understood how the world really worked. Compassion didn't pay the bills or advance your career. Success was measured in dollars and accolades, not in the number of lives touched or hearts warmed. As he began reviewing his patient files for the day, Michael allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, prestige, the adoration of his peers. So what if his personal life was a little empty? He had his work, and that was enough. It had to be enough. Little did Dr. Michael Harrington know that fate had other plans for him. As he sat in his ivory tower, secure in his beliefs and his success, the winds of change were already stirring. And it would all begin with a chance encounter that would shatter his world and force him to confront the very essence of who he had become. The day progressed much like any other in the life of Dr. Michael Harrington, a whirlwind of surgeries, consultations, and administrative duties. As the afternoon sun began its descent over the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the city streets, Michael found himself hurrying out of the hospital, his mind already focused on the charity gala that awaited him. He barely registered the throng of people gathered outside the hospital entrance, patients, visitors, and the ever-present crowd of New York's less fortunate, who often sought shelter in the shadow of the medical center. To Michael, they were little more than background noise, a blur of faces and bodies to be navigated as he made his way to his waiting car. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he strode purposefully towards the valet stand, a small figure darted out from the crowd, colliding with Michael's legs with enough force to make him stumble. Irritated, he looked down to see a boy, no more than 10 years old, sprawled on the ground at his feet. The child's clothes were tattered and dirty, his face smudged with grime, and his eyes, large, brown, and filled with a desperation that should never be seen in one so young, locked onto Michael's with an intensity that was almost painful. "Please, mister," the boy gasped, scrambling to his feet. "Please, you gotta help us. My mom, she's real sick. We don't have no money, but I heard the nurses say you're the best doctor here. Please, can you help her?" For a moment, just a fleeting instant, something stirred in the depths of Michael's heart. A long-forgotten echo of the young man he once was, the idealistic medical student who had sworn to help those in need, regardless of their ability to pay. But that moment passed as quickly as it had come, smothered by years of cynicism and self-interest. Michael's face hardened, his eyes growing cold as he looked down at the pleading child. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice devoid of any real sympathy. "But I don't work for free. There are free clinics in the city that can help your mother. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an important event to attend." With that, he stepped around the boy, brushing off his suit as if to remove any trace of their encounter. He didn't look back to see the child's face crumple in despair, didn't hear the soft sobs that followed him as he climbed into his luxury car. In Michael's mind, he had already dismissed the incident, filing it away as just another unfortunate reality of life in the big city. As the car pulled away from the curb, Michael's thoughts were already turning to the evening ahead. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a glittering affair that would bring together the cream of New York society. It was an opportunity to network, to secure more high-profile patients, to further cement his status as the city's premier surgeon. The drive uptown passed in a blur of twinkling city lights and honking horns. Michael used the time to check his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting his bow tie and smoothing back his hair. By the time the car pulled up to the museum's grand entrance, he had fully composed himself, ready to dazzle the assembled crowd with his charm and wit. The gala was everything he had expected. A sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, the air filled with the tinkling of champagne glasses and the murmur of important conversations. Michael moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and basking in the admiration that followed him like a shadow. "Dr. Harrington, so wonderful to see you," gushed a woman dripping in diamonds. "I simply must tell you about the miracle you performed on my husband's heart. We can't thank you enough." Michael smiled, accepting her praise with a gracious nod. "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Vanderbilt. I'm just glad I could be of assistance." As the evening wore on, Michael found himself engaged in a lively discussion with the hospital's chief benefactor, a Wall Street tycoon with deep pockets and a keen interest in medical advancements. They were deep in conversation about a potential new wing for the cardiac unit when Michael's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. Excusing himself, he stepped away to check the message, expecting it to be from the hospital about an emergency surgery. Instead, he found himself staring at a news alert that made his blood run cold. Tragedy strikes. Homeless woman dies of treatable illness outside Mount Sinai Hospital. 10-year-old son left orphaned. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Michael's mind raced back to the encounter outside the hospital. The desperate boy, the plea for help, the cold dismissal. Could it be? Surely not. It had to be a coincidence. But as he read further, the sickening reality began to sink in. The article described the woman's condition, a severe case of pneumonia that, if caught early and treated properly, would have been entirely manageable. It went on to detail how her young son had spent days trying to get help, approaching doctors and nurses outside the hospital, begging for someone, anyone, to save his mother. Michael felt the champagne flute slip from his suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The noise drew startled looks from nearby guests, but he barely noticed. His ears were ringing, his vision blurring as the full weight of what he had done, or rather, What he had failed to do came crashing down upon him. In that moment, surrounded by the glitz and glamour of New York's elite, Dr. Michael Harrington felt something he hadn't experienced in years: shame. Deep, gut-wrenching shame that threatened to bring him to his knees. As he stumbled away from the confused and concerned onlookers, Michael's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt warred with self-justification, horror with denial. But beneath it all, a small voice, one he had long ago silenced, began to whisper, "What have you become, Michael? What have you lost in your pursuit of success?" Little did he know, this was just the beginning. The carefully constructed world of Dr. Michael Harrington was about to come crashing down, forcing him to confront the man he had become and the values he had abandoned. And in the ashes of his old life, something new and unexpected would begin to take root, a chance for redemption, for rediscovering the humanity he had long ago forgotten. The days following the charity gala passed in a blur for Michael. He went through the motions of his daily routine, performing surgeries, attending meetings, making his rounds, but his mind was elsewhere. The image of the desperate boy outside the hospital haunted him, appearing unbidden in quiet moments and jolting him awake in the dead of night. He tried to rationalize his actions, to convince himself that he couldn't be held responsible for every tragedy that occurred in a city of millions. But the arguments rang hollow, even to his own ears. The truth was inescapable. He had had the power to help, to make a difference, and he had chosen not to. As the story of the homeless woman and her orphaned son gained traction in the media, Michael found himself increasingly on edge. He avoided the break room, where his colleagues huddled around the television, discussing the tragedy in hushed, outraged tones. He declined invitations to appear on talk shows to discuss the broader issues of healthcare inequality, making excuses about his busy schedule. But he couldn't escape the growing sense of unease that seemed to follow him like a shadow. It manifested in small ways at first. A slight tremor in his hands as he performed a routine appendectomy. A moment of hesitation before making an incision. Nothing that would be noticeable to an outside observer, but to a surgeon of Michael's caliber, these tiny imperfections were deeply unsettling. It all came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon, during what should have been a straightforward coronary bypass. Michael stood over the operating table, scalpel in hand, ready to make the first cut. But as he lowered the blade, his vision blurred, and for a heart-stopping moment, he saw not his patient but the face of the homeless boy, pleading for help. The scalpel clattered to the floor, drawing startled looks from the surgical team. "Dr. Harrington?" the anesthesiologist asked, concern evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" Michael blinked, trying to clear his head. I'm fine," he muttered, reaching for a new scalpel with hands that shook ever so slightly. "Let's proceed." But as the surgery progressed, it became clear that something was very wrong. Michael's movements, usually so precise and confident, were hesitant and clumsy. He second-guessed every decision, wasting precious time as the patient's vitals began to fluctuate dangerously. It was only through the quick thinking and skill of his team that a potential disaster was averted. As the patient was wheeled out of the operating room, stable but far from the flawless result that was Dr. Harrington's hallmark, Michael felt the weight of his colleagues' stares. He fled to his office, locking the door behind him and collapsing into his chair. For the first time in his career, Dr. Michael Harrington, the man who had always prided himself on his steady hands and nerves of steel, had frozen in the operating room. The implications were staggering. As he sat there, head in his hands, the carefully constructed facade of his life began to crumble. The awards on his walls, the accolades he had accumulated over the years, they all seemed hollow now, meaningless in the face of the lives he could have saved, but chose not to. A knock on the door startled him from his reverie. "Dr. Harrington?" It was Dr. Emily Chen, the hospital's chief of surgery. "We need to talk about what happened in there." Michael's first instinct was to deflect, to make excuses, to protect the reputation he had spent decades building. But as he opened his mouth to speak, he found he no longer had the energy to maintain the charade. "Come in, Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As Dr. Chen entered, her face a mixture of concern and disappointment, Michael felt something inside him break. The walls he had built around his heart, the protective shell of indifference and self-interest came crashing down, and in that moment, as he looked into the eyes of a colleague who had once admired him, Dr. Michael Harrington did something he hadn't done in years. He wept. The tears came slowly at first, then in great, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. Years of pent-up emotion, of ignored guilt and suppressed compassion, poured out of him in a cathartic flood. Emily, to her credit, said nothing. She simply sat beside him, offering the silent support of a fellow human being witnessing another's pain. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, Michael looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clearer than they had been in years. "I've lost my way, Emily," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know who I am anymore." Dr. Chen nodded, her expression softening. "The question is, Michael, are you ready to find yourself again?" As he pondered her words, Michael's gaze fell on the small silver frame on his desk, the photo of his sister Sarah. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. "I need some time," he said, rising from his chair with a newfound sense of purpose. "There's someone I need to see." Emily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Take all the time you need, Michael. We'll be here when you're ready to come back, if you choose to come back." As Michael left his office, possibly for the last time, he felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. He was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the life he had built and the persona he had cultivated for so long. But beneath the fear, there was a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to reclaim the man he once was, the idealistic young doctor who had entered medicine with dreams of changing the world. As Michael stepped out of the hospital doors, the cool evening air hit his face, bringing with it a sense of possibility. The city stretched out before him, a vast tapestry of lights and shadows, of countless lives intertwined in the great urban dance. Somewhere out there was Sarah, the sister he had pushed away in his relentless pursuit of success. And somewhere, too, was a young boy who had lost everything, a child whose plea for help had set in motion this seismic shift in Michael's life. He hailed a taxi, giving the driver an address he hadn't visited in over a decade. As the cab wove through the busy streets, Michael found himself remembering the last time he had seen Sarah. It had been at their parents' funeral, a somber affair made worse by the tension between the siblings. Sarah, always the passionate one, had confronted him about his absence in their lives, about his growing reputation for coldness and indifference. "You're losing your humanity, Michael," she had said, her eyes brimming with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "And one day, you're going to wake up and realize that all the money and prestige in the world can't fill the hole where your heart used to be." At the time, he had dismissed her words as the naive ramblings of an idealist. But now, as the taxi pulled up to a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood, Michael realized the profound truth in what she had said. His heart pounding, he climbed the stairs to Sarah's third-floor apartment. Each step felt like a journey through time, bringing him closer not just to his estranged sister, but to the person he used to be. As he reached her door, Michael hesitated, his hand hovering over the buzzer. What right did he have to show up here, after all these years? What could he possibly say to bridge the chasm that had grown between them? But before he could talk himself out of it, the door swung open, and there stood Sarah, her curly hair now streaked with gray, lines of laughter and worry etched around her eyes. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, years of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "Michael?" Sarah's voice was a mixture of surprise and wariness. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some explanation or excuse, but what came out instead was a choked sob. "Sarah," he managed, his voice cracking. I need your help. I've lost my way." Sarah's expression softened, a flicker of the deep bond they once shared passing between them. Without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her brother, holding him as he hadn't been held in years. And there, On the threshold of his sister's apartment, Dr. Michael Harrington, renowned surgeon, wealthy socialite, and lost soul, began the long journey back to himself. It would not be an easy path. There would be challenges to face, wrongs to right, and a lifetime of choices to reckon with. But with each tear that fell, with each shuddering breath, Michael felt something long dormant beginning to awaken within him, his humanity. As Sarah led him inside, closing the door behind them, the city continued its ceaseless rhythm outside. But within that small apartment, a transformation was beginning, one that would ripple out to touch countless lives, including that of a young boy who had lost everything but was about to gain an unexpected champion. The road to redemption stretched out before Michael, daunting but filled with possibility. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt ready to walk it, one step at a time. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled Sarah's small but cozy kitchen as the first light of dawn crept through the windows. Michael sat at the worn wooden table, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug, his eyes red-rimmed from a night of long overdue conversations and cathartic tears. Sarah bustled around the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of toast and eggs. The domesticity of the scene was a stark contrast to the sterile luxury Michael had grown accustomed to, but there was a warmth here that he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "So," Sarah said, sliding into the chair across from him, her own coffee mug in hand. "What happens now, Michael?" It was a loaded question, one that Michael had been grappling with throughout the sleepless night. The life he had built for himself, the identity he had cloaked himself in for so long. It all felt like a distant dream now, or perhaps a long-running fever that had finally broken. "I don't know," he admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Dr. Michael Harrington always had an answer, always knew the next step. But now, he was adrift in uncharted waters. "I can't go back to who I was, Sarah. I don't want to, but I don't know how to be anyone else." Sarah reached across the table, placing her hand over his. The gesture, so simple yet so profound, brought a lump to Michael's throat. "You start by remembering who you were before all of this," she said softly. "The boy who used to patch up stray animals in the backyard. The teenager who volunteered at the free clinic every weekend. The young man who swore he'd change the world one patient at a time." As Sarah spoke, memories long buried began to surface. Michael saw himself as a child, cradling an injured sparrow, determined to nurse it back to health. He remembered the thrill of helping at the clinic, the gratitude in the eyes of those who couldn't afford traditional medical care. When had he lost sight of that passion, that drive to make a difference? "I've wasted so much time," he murmured, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. "How do I even begin to make up for it?" Sarah squeezed his hand, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You begin by taking the first step, and then the next. It's never too late to change your story, Michael." As if on cue, the small television in the corner of the kitchen crackled to life, the morning news filling the room. Michael's head snapped up as he heard a familiar story, the tragic death of the homeless woman, the orphaned boy who had begged for help. The child, now identified as 10-year-old Jamie Thompson, remains in the care of social services, the news anchor was saying. Authorities are searching for any living relatives, but as of now, the boy's future remains uncertain. Michael felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. Here was his chance, not to erase what he'd done, but to take a step towards making it right. He turned to Sarah, a newfound determination blazing in his eyes. "I need to find him," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Jamie, I need to help him." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if gauging the sincerity of his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but you're not doing this alone. We're in this together, big brother." As they finished their breakfast and began to plan their next moves, Michael felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, the flutter of excitement, of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, his reputation, his career, his entire way of life. All of it would need to be reevaluated and possibly dismantled. But as he looked at Sarah, saw the pride and hope shining in her eyes, he knew he was finally on the right path. The journey to redemption had begun, and with it, the chance to reclaim not just his humanity, but the very essence of who he was meant to be. As they left the apartment, stepping out into a city that suddenly seemed full of possibilities, Michael made a silent vow. He would find Jamie, and he would do whatever it took to give that boy a chance at a better life. And in doing so, perhaps he could begin to heal the wounds he had inflicted, not just on others, but on his own soul. The Manhattan streets bustled with the morning rush, a sea of people hurrying to their destinations, each caught up in their own personal dramas. But for Michael, the world had shifted on its axis. Every face he saw now held a story, every life an intrinsic value he had long forgotten to acknowledge. As they made their way to the Department of Social Services, Michael and Sarah formulated a plan. It wouldn't be easy to gain access to Jamie, let alone to have any say in his future. But Michael was determined to use every resource at his disposal, his connections, his wealth, his medical expertise, to make a difference in this one boy's life. What he didn't realize was that this decision, this first step on the path to redemption, would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform his own life, but touch the lives of countless others in ways he could never have imagined. As they approached the imposing government building, Michael took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his actions, the responsibility of his choices. But instead of crushing him, it invigorated him. He was Dr. Michael Harrington, and he was about to embark on the most important surgery of his life, the mending of a broken system, starting with one small, wounded heart. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, happiness, and the true meaning of healing. The city pulsed around him, a living organism of 8 million souls, each with their own struggles and triumphs. And somewhere in that vast human tapestry was a little boy named Jamie, waiting for someone to care, someone to fight for him. Michael was ready to be that someone. With Sarah by his side, he stepped into the building, ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead. The road to redemption stretched out before him, daunting but filled with possibility, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dr. Michael Harrington felt truly, unequivocally alive. The Department of Social Services was a labyrinth of bureaucracy, its fluorescent-lit hallways echoing with the shuffling of papers and the muted conversations of overworked caseworkers. Michael and Sarah found themselves seated in a cramped waiting area, surrounded by the quiet desperation of families in crisis. As they waited, Michael couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this environment and the plush waiting rooms of his private practice. Here, there were no expensive artworks adorning the walls, no soft leather chairs to sink into. Instead, the walls were plastered with faded posters about child safety and family resources, the chairs hard plastic that creaked with every movement. Mr. and Dr. Harrington? A tired-looking woman in her mid-40s appeared, clipboard in hand. I'm Elaine Ramirez, Jamie Thompson's caseworker. If you'll follow me, please. As they trailed behind Ms. Ramirez, Michael felt a knot forming in his stomach. What right did he have to be here, to insert himself into this child's life? But Sarah's reassuring presence beside him bolstered his resolve. They were here to help, to make amends, to do what was right. Ms. Ramirez's office was cluttered but organized, the walls lined with filing cabinets bursting with the stories of countless children in need. She gestured for them to sit, her eyes wary as she regarded Michael. Dr. Harrington, she began, her tone carefully neutral, I must admit, I was surprised to receive your call. Your interest in Jamie's case is unexpected. Michael swallowed hard, fighting the urge to fall back on his usual air of professional detachment. Instead, he leaned forward, allowing his genuine concern to show on his face. Ms. Ramirez, I understand your surprise. The truth is, I made a terrible mistake. I had the opportunity to help Jamie and his mother, and I failed to do so. I can't change the past, but I want to do whatever I can to ensure Jamie has a better future. Elaine's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained cautious. That's a noble sentiment, Dr. Harrington, but Jamie's situation is complicated. He has no known relatives, and given his age and background, finding a permanent placement won't be easy. Sarah spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. That's why we're here, Ms. Ramirez. We want to help, whether it's finding Jamie a good foster home, supporting his education, or... She glanced at Michael, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Or even considering adoption ourselves. Elaine's eyebrows shot up at this, her gaze darting between the siblings. Adoption? Dr. Harrington, with all due respect, your lifestyle doesn't exactly scream ready for parenthood. And Ms. Harrington, while your work with underprivileged families is commendable, taking on a traumatized child is an enormous responsibility. Michael felt a flicker of his old defensiveness rising, but he pushed it down. This wasn't about his ego or his reputation. It was about Jamie. You're right, he admitted, the words feeling strange on his tongue. I'm not ready. My life, my priorities, they've been all wrong for a long time. But I'm committed to changing that, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I can be what Jamie needs. Elaine studied them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed, reaching for a thick file on her desk. Jamie's case is challenging. He's been through more in his 10 years than most people face in a lifetime. He's angry, distrustful, and deeply traumatized by his mother's death. Are you sure you're prepared for what you're proposing? Michael and Sarah exchanged a look, years of unspoken communication passing between them in an instant. Then, as one, they turned back to Elaine and nodded. We're sure, Sarah said firmly. All right, Elaine said, her voice tinged with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to arrange for you to meet Jamie. Supervised, of course, but I want to be very clear. This is not a commitment. It's a chance for Jamie to meet you, and for you to understand the reality of what you're considering. If after that you still want to proceed, we'll discuss next steps. But Jamie's well-being is my primary concern. If at any point I feel this isn't in his best interest, it stops. Understood? Michael nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Understood. Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. As they left the office, stepping back into the bustling hallway, Michael felt as if he was seeing the world through new eyes. The faces around him, tired parents, confused children, harried social workers, they were no longer just a backdrop to his life. They were people, each with their own struggles, their own stories. Sarah squeezed his arm gently. You okay? She asked, her voice low. Michael took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. I'm terrified, he admitted. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. As they stepped out into the bright sunlight of the Manhattan afternoon, Michael knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Meeting Jamie, earning his trust, navigating the complex world of foster care and adoption. It would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than any surgery, any medical breakthrough. But as he looked at Sarah, saw the pride and love shining in her eyes, he knew he wasn't alone. Together they would face whatever came next. And somewhere out there was a little boy who needed them, who deserved a chance at happiness, at family, at love. The city pulsed around them, 8 million hearts beating in a complex rhythm of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy. And in that vast human symphony, two hearts, a jaded surgeon and a forgotten child, were about to begin a journey that would change them both forever. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on him. But instead of crushing him, it filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was Dr. Michael Harrington, and he was about to embark on the most important operation of his life. Not in an operating room, but in the messy, beautiful, heartbreaking world of human connection. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with potential pitfalls and challenges. But for the first time and longer than he could remember, Michael was ready to face those challenges head-on. Because somewhere out there was a little boy named Jamie, waiting for someone to care, someone to fight for him. And Michael was determined to be that someone, no matter what it took. The children's wing of the group home was a cacophony of sounds and colors, a stark contrast to the sterile environments Michael was accustomed to. Crayon drawings adorned the walls, their vibrant hues a testament to the resilience of young spirits in the face of adversity. The air was filled with a mixture of laughter, cries, and the constant chatter of children's voices. As Michael and Sarah followed Ms. Ramirez down the corridor, the noise seemed to fade into the background. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, each step bringing him closer to a moment that could change everything. He glanced at Sarah, drawing strength from her reassuring smile. They stopped in front of a door decorated with construction paper stars. Ms. Ramirez turned to them, her expression serious. "Remember," she said softly, "Jamie has been through a lot. He may not be receptive. Don't push too hard." Michael nodded, swallowing hard. As Ms. Ramirez opened the door, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The room was small but cozy, filled with books, toys, and a worn but comfortable-looking couch. And there, curled up in the corner with a tattered comic book, was Jamie. The boy looked up as they entered, his dark eyes wary and far too old for his young face. Michael felt a pang in his chest as he recognized the child who had begged for his help outside the hospital. The weight of his past indifference pressed down on him, threatening to crush his resolve. "Jamie," Ms. Ramirez said gently, "these are the people I told you about, Dr. Harrington and his sister, Sarah. They'd like to talk with you for a bit, if that's okay." Jamie's gaze flickered between Michael and Sarah, lingering for a moment on Michael's face. A flash of recognition passed through his eyes, quickly replaced by a guarded expression. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to say, "Whatever," without uttering a word. Michael stepped forward, his usual confidence deserting him. How do you begin to make amends for a mistake that cost someone everything? He cleared his throat, keenly aware of the inadequacy of words in this moment. "Hello, Jamie," he began, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. I owe you an apology, a big one. I made a terrible mistake and I can't change that. But I'm here because I want to help, if you'll let me." Jamie's eyes narrowed, a mixture of confusion and suspicion evident in his gaze. "You're the doctor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one who wouldn't help my mom." The accusation, delivered without heat but with a bone-deep weariness, hit Michael like a physical blow. He nodded, fighting back the urge to defend himself, to make excuses. "Yes," he admitted. "And I was wrong, so very wrong." Sarah stepped forward then, her innate warmth seeming to soften the tension in the room. "Jamie," she said, kneeling down to be at eye level with the boy, "we know we can't change what happened, but we're here because we care about what happens to you now. We'd like to get to know you if you're willing." Jamie looked at Sarah, then back at Michael. For a long moment he was silent, his young face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice small but clear. "I guess we can talk." What followed was an hour that would forever change the course of Michael's life. As Jamie slowly, hesitantly began to open up, Michael found himself seeing the world through the eyes of a child who had faced more hardship in 10 years than most people experience in a lifetime. Jamie spoke of his mother, her struggles, her unwavering love for him, her determination to give him a better life. He talked about nights spent in shelters or on the streets, about the constant gnaw of hunger, about the dream of a home that always seemed just out of reach. And as he listened, Michael felt something shifting deep within him. The walls he had built around his heart, the cynicism he had cultivated like armor, began to crumble. In their place, a fierce protectiveness began to grow, a determination to ensure that this child, this brave, resilient boy, would never again feel alone or unwanted. As their time drew to a close, Michael found himself making a promise, not just to Jamie, but to himself. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said softly, "but I want you to know that from this moment on, you're not alone. Whatever happens, whatever you need, Sarah and I will be here. We're on your side, Jamie. Always." The boy looked at him for a long moment, his eyes searching Michael's face as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. As they left the group home, stepping back into the bustling city streets, Michael felt as if he was seeing the world anew. The city that had once been merely a backdrop to his ambitions now pulsed with life, with stories, with possibilities. Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did good in there, big brother," she said softly. Michael shook his head, overwhelmed by the enormity of what lay ahead. "It's just the beginning," he said. "We have so much to do, so much to figure out." As they walked, plans already forming, Michael felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, vibrant hope for the future. He knew the road ahead would be challenging. Gaining custody of Jamie, helping him heal, rebuilding his own life, none of it would be easy. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dr. Michael Harrington felt truly alive. He had taken the first step on a journey of redemption, a path that would lead him back to the heart of what it meant to be a healer, a human being, a force for good in the world. And somewhere in the city behind them, a little boy named Jamie dared to dream of a future brighter than any he had ever imagined. The seeds of a new family, of healing and hope, had been planted. What would grow from those seeds remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks that followed Michael's first meeting with Jamie were a whirlwind of activity, emotion, and profound change. The polished, aloof surgeon who had once strode through life with detached superiority was gone, replaced by a man on a mission to right wrongs, to heal wounds both seen and unseen, and to build a future for a child who had lost everything. Michael threw himself into the process of becoming Jamie's foster parent with the same intensity he had once reserved for his most challenging surgeries. He attended parenting classes, pored over books on child psychology and trauma recovery, and engaged in lengthy discussions with social workers and child welfare experts. Sarah, true to her word, was by his side every step of the way. Her experience working with underprivileged families proved invaluable as they navigated the complex world of foster care and adoption. Together they transformed Michael's sleek, impersonal penthouse into a warm, welcoming space that a child could call home. But the greatest transformation was happening within Michael himself. The man who had once measured his worth in accolades and bank balances now found himself learning a new kind of currency, one measured in small smiles, tentative hugs, and moments of quiet understanding. Their visits with Jamie became more frequent, each one a delicate dance of building trust and forging connections. Michael learned to listen, really listen, in a way he never had before. He heard the fear behind Jamie's bravado, the longing beneath his silence, the hope that flickered, fragile but persistent, in his eyes. There were setbacks, of course. Days when Jamie would retreat into himself, overwhelmed by grief or fear. Moments when Michael's patience would wear thin, his old habits of detachment threatening to resurface. But with each challenge, each stumble, Michael found himself growing stronger, more determined, more committed to the path he had chosen. One particularly difficult day, after a visit where Jamie had been especially withdrawn, Michael found himself sitting in Sarah's small kitchen, his head in his hands. "What if I'm not cut out for this?" he asked, his voice thick with doubt. "What if I'm just making things worse?" Sarah sat beside him, her hand warm on his shoulder. "Michael," she said softly, "do you remember what Dad used to say about his work?" Michael looked up, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Their father had been a small-town general practitioner, beloved by his community. He said that healing wasn't just about fixing bodies, but about mending souls. Sarah nodded. "And that's exactly what you're doing now. It's not easy, and it's not always pretty, but it's the most important work you've ever done." As the weeks turned into months, Michael's life took on a rhythm he had never imagined for himself. He scaled back his surgical practice, taking on only the most critical cases. His colleagues were baffled by this change, but Michael found he no longer cared about their opinions or expectations. Instead, his days were filled with a new kind of urgency, preparing for Jamie's eventual placement in his home. He worked tirelessly to meet every requirement, to anticipate every need. And with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of paperwork, home visits, and nervous anticipation, the day arrived. Jamie was coming home. As Michael stood in the newly decorated bedroom, walls painted a soft blue, shelves filled with books and toys. He felt a mixture of excitement and terror unlike anything he had ever experienced in an operating room. The sound of the front door opening sent his heart racing. He stepped into the hallway to see Jamie standing there, a small backpack clutched in his hands, his eyes wide as he took in his new surroundings. "Welcome home, Jamie," Michael said softly, kneeling down to the boy's level. "I know it's a big change and it might be scary, but I want you to know that you're safe here. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." Jamie looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Michael in a fierce hug. As Michael held the boy close, feeling the tremors that ran through his small frame, he made a silent vow. He would be the father this child deserved, the protector he needed, the champion he had always lacked. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But Michael was committed to this new path with every fiber of his being. That night, as Jamie slept in his new room, Michael stood at the window, looking out over the city lights. The Manhattan skyline, once a symbol of his ambition and success, now seemed to pulse with new meaning. Each twinkling light represented a life, a story, a possibility for connection and healing. Sarah joined him, wrapping an arm around his waist. "How does it feel?" she asked softly. Michael turned to her, his eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and joy. "Terrifying," he admitted. "Overwhelming. But also, right. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As they stood there, brother and sister reunited in purpose, Michael felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He had been given a second chance, not just to make amends for his past mistakes, but to rediscover the very essence of what it meant to be a healer, a human being, a force for good in the world. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be tears and tantrums, nightmares and setbacks, but there would also be laughter, discovery, and the slow, beautiful unfolding of a family forged not by blood, but by choice and love. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Michael made his way to Jamie's room, quietly opening the door to check on the sleeping child. The sight of Jamie, peaceful in slumber, filled Michael with a fierce, protective love he had never known he was capable of feeling. In that moment, Dr. Michael Harrington, once renowned for his surgical skill and detached demeanor, realized that he had finally performed the most important operation of his life. He had opened his own heart, and in doing so, had given both himself and a wounded child the greatest gift of all, the chance to heal, to grow, and to build a future filled with love and possibility. As he gently closed the door, Michael knew that this was just the beginning. The journey of redemption, of becoming the man and the father he was meant to be, was far from over. But with Jamie by his side and Sarah's unwavering support, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the end, Michael had discovered the most profound truth of all, that true healing, true success, comes not from accolades or wealth, but from the connections we forge, the lives we touch, and the love we choose to give freely, without expectation or condition. And so, as a new day dawned over New York City, a new chapter began in the lives of Michael, Jamie, and Sarah, a chapter filled with hope, with challenges, and with the infinite possibilities that come when we open our hearts to the transformative power of love and second chances. The months that followed Jamie's arrival in Michael's home were a roller coaster of emotions, challenges, and profound moments of connection. For Michael, it was a crash course in parenting, forcing him to confront his own shortcomings and grow in ways he never imagined possible. Jamie's transition to his new life was far from smooth. The trauma of his past, the loss of his mother, and the abrupt change in his circumstances manifested in a variety of ways. There were night terrors that left both Jamie and Michael exhausted, sudden outbursts of anger that seemed to come out of nowhere, and periods of withdrawal where Jamie would retreat into himself, unreachable even by Michael's patient coaxing. One particularly difficult evening, after a day where Jamie had lashed out at school and then refused to speak for hours, Michael found himself at his wits' end. He retreated to the balcony of their penthouse, the cool night air a welcome respite from the tension inside. Sarah joined him, wordlessly handing him a cup of tea. "Rough day?" she asked softly. Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the city sprawled out before them. I don't know if I'm cut out for this, Sarah, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm a surgeon. I fix things, but I don't know how to fix this. Sarah was quiet for a moment, sipping her own tea. Then she turned to her brother, her eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and determination. You're right, she said. You can't fix this. Because Jamie isn't broken, Michael. He's hurting. And healing takes time. Her words hit Michael like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the mindset he had unknowingly brought to his relationship with Jamie. He had approached parenting like a problem to be solved, a condition to be cured. But Sarah was right. Jamie wasn't a patient to be fixed. He was a child who needed love, patience, and unwavering support. That realization marked a turning point in Michael's journey as a parent. He began to approach each day not with the goal of fixing Jamie, but of understanding him, of creating a safe space where healing could occur naturally. He started small, establishing routines that provided Jamie with a sense of stability and predictability. Bedtime stories became a nightly ritual, a quiet moment of connection that both Michael and Jamie came to treasure. Weekend outings to the park or museum offered opportunities for Jamie to explore and for Michael to see the world through a child's eyes. Slowly but surely, Jamie began to open up. There were still difficult days, moments when the weight of his past seemed overwhelming. But there were also breakthroughs. The first time Jamie spontaneously hugged Michael, the day he proudly brought home an A on a school project, the evening he finally felt safe enough to talk about his mother without breaking down. Michael, too, was changing. The man who had once measured his worth by his surgical success now found himself taking immense pride in the small victories of parenthood. Jamie's first sleepover without nightmares, the gradual improvement in his grades, the slow but steady emergence of his smile. One Saturday morning, as Michael made pancakes, a skill he had painstakingly acquired for Jamie's sake, he was struck by how much his life had changed. The kitchen, once an unused showpiece, was now the heart of their home, filled with the aroma of coffee and the sound of Jamie's laughter as he attempted to juggle oranges. "Hey, Dad!" Jamie called out, the words still new enough to send a thrill through Michael's heart. "Can we go to the park later? I want to practice for the soccer team tryouts." Michael turned, a smile spreading across his face. "Of course we can, buddy. We'll make a day of it." As they sat down to breakfast, Michael marveled at the easy domesticity of the moment. This simple act of sharing a meal, of planning a day together, was something he had never imagined for himself. Yet here he was, finding more joy in a plate of slightly misshapen pancakes than he had ever found in the most exclusive restaurants. As they ate, Jamie chatted excitedly about the upcoming soccer tryouts, his eyes shining with a mixture of enthusiasm and nervousness. Michael listened intently, offering encouragement and advice, all the while marveling at how much he had learned about the sport in the past few months, all for the sake of connecting with his son. Later at the park, Michael watched as Jamie practiced his dribbling, his small face set in concentration. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the scene, and Michael felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This child, who had entered his life through the most tragic of circumstances, had become the center of his world. As Jamie took a break, flopping down on the grass beside Michael, he looked up with a grin. "Thanks for bringing me here, Dad," he said, the words still sending a thrill through Michael's heart. "Do you think I have a chance at making the team?" Michael ruffled Jamie's hair, his chest swelling with pride. "I think you have a chance at anything you set your mind to, buddy. You're one of the bravest, most determined people I know." Jamie's smile widened, and he leaned against Michael's side, a gesture of trust and affection that spoke volumes about how far they had come. As they sat there, enjoying the warmth of the sun and each other's company, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He thought of the man he had been, cold, detached, measuring his worth in accolades and bank balances. That man seemed like a stranger now, a cautionary tale of what happens when you lose sight of what truly matters. He thought of Sarah, whose unwavering support and gentle guidance had been the cornerstone of this new life. Her belief in him, even when he had lost faith in himself, had been the lifeline he needed to navigate the choppy waters of redemption and renewal. And he thought of Jamie, this remarkable child who had suffered so much yet still found the strength to love, to trust, to hope. Jamie had taught him more about courage, resilience, and the human spirit than any medical textbook ever could. As the years passed, Michael and Jamie's bond only grew stronger. There were challenges, of course. The turbulent teenage years, the moments when Jamie's past trauma resurfaced, the times when Michael doubted his abilities as a father. But through it all, they faced each obstacle together, their love and commitment to each other unwavering. Michael continued his work as a surgeon, but with a newfound perspective. He brought the compassion and empathy he had learned as a father into his practice, becoming known not just for his surgical skill, but for his genuine care for his patients. He became an advocate for healthcare reform, using his influence to push for better access to medical care for underserved communities. Jamie, inspired by his father's dedication and his own experiences, chose to pursue a career in social work. On the day of his college graduation, as Michael watched his son accept his diploma, he felt a pride that surpassed any he had ever known in his professional achievements. And so, as Dr. Michael Harrington looked back on the winding path that had led him to this point, he realized that his greatest accomplishment wasn't measured in surgical successes or medical breakthroughs. It was measured in the love of a child who called him Dad, in the lives he had touched through his renewed commitment to compassionate care, and in the man he had become, a man who understood that true healing goes far beyond the physical, touching the very essence of the human spirit. The story of Dr. Michael Harrington and Jamie Thompson wasn't just one of redemption. It was a testament to the transformative power of love, the strength of the human spirit, and the profound truth that it's never too late to open your heart and change your life's trajectory. As Michael wrapped his arm around Jamie's shoulders, walking out of the graduation ceremony into a future bright with possibility, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, father and son, bound not by blood, but by a love that had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And in that moment, surrounded by the joy of the day and the warmth of family, Dr. Michael Harrington knew with absolute certainty that he had finally performed the most important operation of his life, not in a sterile operating room, but in the messy, beautiful, utterly human realm of the heart.